Hello and welcome to the first of two videos that are designed to answer the question, how do SSAS and SIPPs compare? In this first video, I simply want to compare the operational details of a SAS and a SIPP. And in the second video, I'm going to look at them both in a little bit more detail and talk about the pros and cons from a business owner's point of view. So let's start off then by looking at the operational details, and just bear with me a second while I share my screen with you and just put a little presentation up. Okay, right. So first of all then, let's talk about the structures of a SIPP and a SAS. So from a SSAS's point of view, a SAS is an occupational pension scheme and it can have multiple members. The employer, the sponsoring employer, creates an individual trust for each of the schemes that they operate, and they can have more than one SAS. And the members are appointed as trustees of the scheme. In a SIPP, it's a personal pension scheme. It's a single member scheme, and it's commonly set up under a master trust by the providers. SSASs are regulated by the pension regulator. The Financial Conduct Authority is not involved at all. A SIPP falls under the regulation of the Financial Conduct Authority, and I'm going to cover that in a little bit more detail in the second video. Now, as far as the trustees are concerned, in a SAS, every member is appointed as a trustee, and that means that everybody has certain responsibilities. The main one is deciding on the investments that will be made. In a SIPP, the provider normally acts as the trustee, and they carry out the major responsibilities in managing that particular pension. Now, some SIPP providers do appoint members as joint trustees, but not all do the same. As far as membership is concerned, there's no legislative restrictions on membership in a SAS. Anyone can join a SAS as long as they meet the scheme's eligibility requirements. Now, membership of a SAS is usually limited to less than 12 members, so up to 11. And typically, they're company directors, key employees, and family members themselves. In a SIPP, well, there's no legislative restrictions on membership. Anyone can join in a SIPP if they meet the provider's eligibility requirements. As far as control is concerned, in a SAS, it's the employer who has overall control of the scheme, with the administrator having day-to-day responsibility. Now, the administrator could be one of the members of the SAS, but it could also be an external administrator appointed on behalf of the SAS itself. But the trustees, and these are the members, they make the investment decisions. Now, in a SIPP, the provider has overall control of the scheme, and with their administrator having the day-to-day responsibility. And the individual member makes the investment decisions. Now, as far as the investments are concerned, the investments in a SAS are registered in the names of the trustees. And it's up to the employer when they set up the statements of investment principles that decides on what kind of investments are allowable. But in a SIPP, investments are registered in the name of the SIPP trustee, and the provider decides which investments are allowable and within the SIPP rules. Now, property, as far as a SAS is concerned, then a SAS can invest in commercial property, and this is quite common. Investments in residential property would result in tax charges. And a SIPP can do exactly the same. It can invest in commercial property. The main difference now is in loans. Now, in a SAS, the employer can take out a loan for the value of up to 50% of the scheme's net assets. But there must be a first charge on another asset, so the loan has to be secured. Now, loans are not allowed to members or anyone related to them, but there is no limit for loans to unconnected parties. With a SIPP, loans are not allowed to the members or any person or company related to the member, but there is no limit for loans to unconnected parties. Borrowing, well, borrowing is the same for both a SIPP and a SSAS. Both of them can borrow up to 50% of the net value of the fund. Now, as far as shares are concerned, a SSAS can invest up to 5% of the fund value in the employer's shares. Now, if there is more than one sponsoring employer, then the total value of the shares in these employers cannot exceed 20% of the time of purchase. But in a SIPP, up to 70% of the fund can be invested in any company if this is acceptable to the SIPP provider. However, if the SIPP invests in a company that is controlled by the member or an associated person, then tax charges will apply. Tax relief, well, both schemes contributions into both of these schemes are eligible for tax relief. With a SSAS, it's up to the individual to claim the tax relief on their annual return, on their annual tax return. In a SIPP, then the SIPP provider can claim the tax back on behalf of the individual. And as far as the allocation of investments are concerned, in a SSAS, the investments are not necessarily allocated to an individual member. If the funds are invested jointly, then there's a notional share of the fund allocated to that particular individual. But in certain circumstances, individuals can invest parts of their pension for their own interest. And in a SIPP, investments are allocated to a specific member. Members can combine their funds to purchase assets together, but this is quite complicated. And particularly where we're involving more than one SIPP provider, this can cause all kinds of issues. So I hope that's helped to give you an idea as to the main operational differences between a SIPP and a SSAS. And as I said, in the next video, I'm going to do a little bit more of a comparison between how a SIPP and a SSAS can be used and what the benefits are to a company business owner. So I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.